Homeschooling and social skills. I know this is a big one for a lot of families. If you're a homeschooler or if you've considered homeschooling and you've talked about it with other people, one of the things you've probably heard is them raising the concern of, well, how will your kids develop social skills and teamwork and make friends if they're homeschooled? This is something that I think really weighs on a lot of people's minds. I think if you're considering homeschooling, for some parents, it's a big concern. I think for people who aren't into homeschooling, it just is one of those things that seems weird and they can't kind of comprehend how this could work out. It's really entirely not true. And I want to talk about it because I think, again, there are probably a lot of parents considering homeschooling who it is a concern for them. Like, how are we going to make this work? Are they going to be just socially isolated? Are they going to develop social skills? The first thing I would lead off with in this is sticking your kids in a room or a series of rooms with another pool of kids for the length of a school year. That doesn't automatically make them develop healthy social skills. In fact, often it's the opposite. Now, I went to public school. I believe the number of students in my public school was something around 1,100. It was one of the, if not the biggest school in the state. My graduating class was somewhere around 330. Do you think of all those people, all of them had exceptionally developed social skills and teamwork ability? No, absolutely not. And I'm not saying that to be disparaging to any of my classmates. It's just a ridiculous notion to think that all these people are just so socially apt because they went to school and spent time together. School sometimes tries, but for the most part doesn't teach good social skills. They don't teach good ways to interact with others. And also, some people have this naturally and some people don't. Essentially, what I would say is don't connect the two. Now, when you're a homeschooler, there are all kinds of activities that you can do with your kids that have other kids there, also other adults and things. For instance, with my kids, we have done a series of martial arts, we've done dance classes, we've done horseback riding, we've done a number of different field trips and things, all that have other kids involved. Roller skating is another one. All kinds of activities. Some of these you might be doing with your kids already, even if you're, sending them to public school or private school. That doesn't change. And that's actually, I would suggest, a healthier environment for kids to spend time with other kids because they're not in this sort of academic pressure cooker of expectations and anxiety and peer pressure and all these sorts of things. They're actually out doing something together of a like interest that can lead to developing better relationship skills with each other. And if you have a child who's an introvert or who struggles with social skills, putting them in school is not necessarily going to fix it. It's not going to just make it better because they're around other kids. In fact, if anything, it can lead to more social anxiety and ultimately it can lead to resentment in some sorts of ways where kids will want to shut off and just sort of get away from people all the time. Now, the next part to this also connects with homeschool academics. When you can find ways to make learning fun for your kids, when you can find ways to engage their intellect and to engage their fascination, like we've talked about in other videos. I've talked about how, the most important thing of homeschooling is to instill a love of learning and a level of fascination with the world in your children. When they have that, so the great thing about fascination and about being interested in the world and about learning a lot is it's kind of a pay it forward thing. Like, imagine your kids being as excited to share knowledge about history as they are to share knowledge about Harry Potter or Pokemon or something like that. If you can find the right way to communicate to your kids what you need to communicate and what they need to learn and actually get them excited about it, it's going to make them better conversationalists because they're going to have more interesting and unique things to talk about that they sort of are bursting with and can't wait to share with people. Now, the second side to that is you can actually work on social skills with your kids. You can talk about them as to how to converse with people. How do you make friends? How do you relate to adults? How do you deal with people that you don't like? There are books that you can read. In fact, one book that I would highly suggest is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's an older book and some of it is geared towards business. Some of it's geared towards like sales, but particularly for like middle school age and above, I think that's a really great book as far as learning how to communicate with people, learning how to relate to people, how to get them to listen to you. it really does what it says. It's a wonderful book, and I would highly suggest reading it to your children. It's a book that will actually give them useful knowledge that they can use their entire lives. And that's not taught in schools. You can actually spend time with your kids developing and cultivating these sorts of communication and relationship skills that's tailored specifically to them. Now, when our kids were in public school, one of the things that I found was they were spending more time nowadays on emotional self-awareness. And at first I thought it was really good. And in some ways I do think it's good. They were talking with kids a lot about, being aware of what your emotional mental state is and how that can sort of affect the world. The problem that I started to see, though, is that it was giving a lot of kids this sort of inflated sense of their own emotional importance and being too preoccupied with what their feelings were. And then they weren't really taking it the next step. It was just this kind of like, the proper way really to teach about emotions is that your emotions are valid and legitimate, but they shouldn't dictate your actions. You shouldn't pretend your emotions aren't there. You shouldn't seek to control your emotions because you really can't control your emotions, but you should seek to understand them and not let your emotions control you. That's not what they were doing. They were really just teaching kids to kind of be aware of where they were emotionally and then sort of letting it go. Now, I could very crassly say, I've seen the way they're teaching kids to interact with each other in school, and I don't want any part of it for my kids. And there is truth to that, but there's a provocative edge to that I don't want to engage too much. I do want to say that one of the things that they are teaching kids by leadership, this is not in the curriculum, but this is what we see by the way they're teaching them to interact and the way they're doing things, is they're teaching them to be very tribal. They're teaching them to splinter off into groups and to look at groups with judgment and with hierarchy. And for instance, we dealt with some pretty serious bullying with some of my kids when they were in public schools, but the school didn't particularly care because they weren't members of the right groups to be bullied, if that makes sense. They weren't members of the groups being bullied that got them points for being bullied. They were just kids. Again, I know a lot of parents do have serious concerns about this. It's a very, very big issue. And it comes from a combination of things. I think it comes from the unknown. I think it comes from this idea of like, many of us who went to public school, it's like you just can't fathom of not kind of being in that big social world for a long time. And how will you make friends? Well, you will make friends. You don't even have to put in extra legwork. Like if your kids are in public school right now, then you're probably setting up play dates for them, bringing them to other activities. That doesn't change. That wouldn't change with homeschooling. All that changes is you sort of save them from, again, that what I like to think of as a social academic pressure cooker that they no longer have to be in. They can still get these other great extracurricular activities with other kids. They just don't have to submit themselves to that sort of stress and anxiety for the rest of the year. So I think there is definitely an unknown of just kind of like, I can't fathom with this. The second part is that some of you might know or have known weird homeschooling families. Okay, that's fair. I've known weird homeschooling families. I still know some weird homeschooling families. But I also know and have known weird families who send their kids to other schools. That part doesn't change either. There are weirdos everywhere in the world. Well, what's a weirdo? That's conversation for another time. One person's weirdo is another person's normal person. But my point is that whether or not your kids are going to school or staying at home, that really doesn't have any kind of implication on what their personality is, how they interact, how they learn to interact. They're just separate issues. So hopefully this helps if you're someone considering homeschooling, but that's a concern. We haven't really found any difference in that. In fact, if anything, our kids were healthier, happier, more confident, more secure by not being in that environment all the time, but they were still in these other environments where they were meeting kids. They were meeting kids and spending time with their friends in healthier areas where they were actually developing teamwork skills, where they were sharing activities that they sort of had they all shared a love and joy from these activities. Value things. You can send your kids to groups that have the same sorts of values. Our kids go to a church class that's very, very good for us. You can look into your local libraries. Your local libraries often will have homeschooling groups. If they don't have homeschooling groups, they're going to have just other youth groups in general for a number of different activities. Check out what's around you. Keep in mind that your kids can still be involved in teams and other groups, and that those are better avenues for them to make friends and develop social skills than just being in school would be. But please feel free to let everyone know in the comments what is your experience with this and what you think of this whole thing regarding relating social skills to homeschooling, or being concerned about homeschoolers not having good enough social skills. Let us know what you think.